Hey everybody, this is Perch. We got another mail here. What is it? It's the prime problem. What is the prime problem? Well, we're about to find out. It says, Dear Perch, something I've noticed in superhero comics since I was a kid is that new characters will come out and they'll have a good costume, origin, and supporting cast, but a very poor gallery of villains. We're talking about villains a lot lately. I call this the prime problem. It's named after the Malibu Comics character Prime because he is the first character that I encountered with this issue. I have two questions. First, do you agree that this is a common problem for new characters in comics? I do. Second, if you do agree, why do so many creators make this mistake? The Prime problem existed long before Prime and arguably before superhero comics even existed. This should be a well-known trap to avoid, but it seems like most creators have not figured it out yet. Why? Well, again, not to be a broken record, because I've talked about villains a lot, but I'm going to take a different angle on this. This isn't going to be not another video just talking about how we have shitty villains, although we do. In many cases, I think, particularly lately, writers have read a lot of comics where the villain or the main angst or conflict is within the hero. So it's kind of like, Superman, is the most interesting part about Superman that, he is this iconic character that has to face villainy and, pull things off with kind of superhuman strength and find a way to win. This was the Superman of the Silver Age, which included Superman fighting a bunch of kind of wacky villains. Sometimes you'd get recurring things, Lex Luthor's, fucking things up again, whatever it happens to be. Superman is off on various shenanigans and hijinks, having adventures. But as time went on, we got stories, the Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow and some of these other comics where we deconstructed Superman a little bit. But he, in addition to having, he's smiling and he's fighting all these villains and he's saving people and everything else, he also there's a tragedy to him because he's a man apart, because he's a forever alien on this world, because he'll, stay the same age while he watches the world die around him. This love or romance he has with Lois Lane will, of course, end with him burying her and him living on. The idea that, he is invulnerable and has strength, but, he cares for humanity but can never be a part of humanity. It's that kind of stuff. And when you first read a comic that does this, it deconstructs a hero or takes that different look at what makes them tick, your first reaction, I imagine for most of you, was for me, was like, wow, this is an interesting comic. This is an interesting story. I hadn't thought about Superman in this way before. This is some really kind of heavy stuff. This is an angle we don't normally see in comics. And that's kind of where that, you remember those books, the first time you read Watchmen or Dark Knight Returns or, Born Again or the various comics that took characters and twisted them a little bit, or at least, forced you to look at them in a new way. Those stories set themselves apart from, superhero comics where it's like, yeah, in this issue, some fifth dimensional imps come to Earth and start, fucking things up, and Superman has to save them. Like those comics are the ones you read and you enjoyed and you loved, but the ones you remember are the ones that gave you something to think about. And those comics typically were, deconstructed elements. So as writers have come along after that, they want to leave their mark on these comics, on these characters. They want to have their stories be told. They want to have their take on a character be remembered. Nothing wrong with that. The problem is you can't do a deconstructed take month after month after month. The reason why a lot of these stories by Frank Miller or Alan Moore or, any number of creators, the reason why they worked is because you had, 30, 40, 50 issues of the character just having adventures. You built up the equity in this comic to have this, this kind of character that you could subvert. It's kind of the entire subversion of expectations doesn't work when you don't have a lot of material to subvert. Meaning, if you have a Superman story, and every month it's a kind of deep, tragic look at why Superman is forever apart from the rest of society, why he carries his burden on his shoulders with a smile, but there's an inner sadness and tragedy to what he does. That comic could be cool. It could be deep. You could get an Eisner for it. Lots of reasons why that could be a very interesting book. But if every single month you publish that book, it's not special anymore. You're not giving us a different look into the character. You're giving us the same look over and over into the character. And I think a lot of writers, when they do this to the letter writer, when they do this trap of, a new costume, you've got all this work with these characters to give them a personality, give them kind of all these different elements to who they are. You can do that, but if you don't give them just good adventures to kind of disrupt or to give this different look and feel of, if you never do that part, then you never get the you never get that deep story, because there's no deep story to tell. And I think Prime, is a decent example, because they focus so much on the supporting cast and the backstory. They didn't really deconstruct, but they focused on a lot of the elements that, if you read, put it this way, Spider-Man, after 100 issues, you've got a huge supporting cast. And that's great, and it works for that character. It definitely helps make that character what he is, and everything about Peter Parker. But the challenge is, when you create a brand new character, you have to put in the work. You have to put in the 100 issues to get to the point where the supporting cast, means a damn. If you don't do that initial work, then all you get is like forcing a bunch of supporting cast and complexity to this character that hasn't built up the credibility to need it yet. It breaks the system. It breaks what this comic is meant to be about. And the lack of villains is often where it comes in. It's like, well, who needs villains if we have all this internal turmoil and complexity and everything else? The real, the story that's going to win me the award is not the one where, a guy in a goblin suit comes out and chases the hero around and throws bombs at him, and the hero has to defeat him. The thing you're going to win the award for is the in-depth psychological tale of how this character is deep and complex, but flawed and tragic. And so you get hung up in trying to tell that story, and you forget that what makes that story tick is a lot of the quote-unquote mundane, the basic superhuman fights that make the comic, give the comic a platform in which you can tell every now and then one of these deeper stories. It can't be Alan Moore every month. You have to have some regular old adventures and then be Alan Moore every now and then. That's what gives a comic the flavor and the complexity and the depth that you get to then play with. The Prime problem is an interesting way to put it. I don't know. It feels kind of cruel to Prime, but, it's not a bad analogy. I don't know. I think that there's a lot that can be said for really great villains and telling these great stories, but you do have to, you do have to let the comic breathe with regular day in, day out adventures. Thanks for listening.